First Officer Bixie of the Galactic Warship Crash Course found herself adjusting her moisture suit for the third time in as many minutes. The environmental controls on the bridge were perfect, as always, but something about staring at the tactical display made her skin feel uncomfortably dry. Perhaps it was the sheer scale of what she was seeing. 10,000 ships, spread across the Kuiper belt of the Sol system, maintaining the containment of humanity's expansion. Status report from Section 7, called out Sensor Officer Bax, all four hands dancing across his console. No movement from the inner system. Passive scans show normal commercial traffic between Earth and Mars, but nothing beyond the asteroid belt. Bixie chittered in acknowledgement, a habit she'd picked up from her old mentor. The humans had been suspiciously quiet lately. Too quiet, if anyone bothered to ask her opinion. Not that they did. Captain Nex ran a tight ship, and opinions were reserved for official briefings. First Officer, Lieutenant Tick spoke up from the communication station, her moisture suit showing signs of recent maintenance with its slightly chenier finish. Admiral Rax wants all command staff to review the latest intelligence briefing. Pulling up the report on her console, Bixie scrolled through the usual warnings about human Deathworlder physiology, their aggressive expansion policies, and their disturbing tendency to solve problems with what they called excessive enthusiasm. Nothing she hadn't seen before in her 15 cycles of service. The massive view screen at the front of the bridge showed their section of the blockade. 500 ships, arranged in a precise three-dimensional grid pattern. The Crash Course, being one of the newer Vigilance-class cruisers, held a position near the center of their formation. Its advanced sensor suite made it ideal for coordinating the surrounding vessels. "Something's wrong with the long-range sensors," Bax suddenly announced, his upper hands freezing while his lower ones continued their constant movement. That can't be right." Bixie moved to his station, her boots making soft clicking sounds on the polished deck. "Report, Sensor Officer. Madam, I'm detecting an energy signature from just beyond our sensor range." He paused, running the scan again. "The mass reading suggests a vessel, but it would have to be." Another pause. "This can't be correct. According to these readings, it's larger than our entire fleet combined." "Impossible," Bixie stated, but she felt her skin growing drier by the second. "Run a diagnostic." "It has to be a sensor ghost," or the deck beneath them shuddered slightly. On the tactical display, a massive contact began to materialize. Bixie felt her four hands clenching involuntarily as the readings were confirmed by other ships in the fleet. The contact was real, and it was exactly as large as their sensors had suggested. "Alert Status 1, she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Notify Captain Nex immediately. All hands to battle stations." As the alert klaxons began to sound throughout the ship, Bixie found herself remembering an old human phrase she'd come across during her xenological studies: "Be careful what you wish for." She'd been complaining about the humans being too quiet. And now, "Energy readings are off the scale," Bax reported, his voice cracking slightly. "Their weapon systems, First Officer, I've never seen anything like this. The power output alone suggests technology far beyond our understanding." "Remember your training," Bixie said, as much to herself as to her crew. "We are the Galactic Armada. We've maintained peace in this galaxy for 10,000 cycles. Whatever the humans have built, we still outnumber them 10,000 to 1. But as she watched the massive human vessel continue to materialize on their sensors, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that numbers might not matter this time. Not against something like this. Captain Nex's voice came over the internal comms. "First Officer Bixie, report to my ready room immediately." As she headed for the captain's ready room, Bixie found herself wondering if anyone else's moisture suit was having trouble keeping up with their anxiety. Somehow she suspected she wasn't alone in feeling very, very dry indeed. Captain Nex's ready room felt unusually warm, or perhaps it was just Bixie's imagination. The captain stood at his viewing window, all four arms clasped behind his back, staring at the distant spot where sensors indicated the massive contact would emerge. "Tell me again," First Officer Nex said quietly, "exactly how large?" Bixie checked her datapad for the fourth time. "Current estimates suggest it masses approximately 1.3 times our entire fleet, sir." "Energy readings are, well, to be honest, sir, they're beyond our ability to measure accurately." The ship emerged from FTL at that moment, and both officers fell silent. Bixie felt her throat constricting despite her moisture suit's automatic compensation. The vessel was beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way. Its hull gleamed with a dark, metallic sheen that seemed to drink in the starlight. Weapon emplacements that made their most powerful destroyers look like toys bristled along its length. But most impressive or terrifying was its movement. Something that large should have been sluggish, ponderous. Instead, it moved with the grace of a dancer. Designation. Nex asked, his voice barely a whisper. They're broadcasting openly, sir. They're calling it humanity's pride. Bixie checked the incoming data. Sir, they're powering up weapons but not raising shields. They don't think they need them, Nex said, turning to face her. His moisture suit showed signs of stress around the joints. He was nervous too. Get me Admiral Rax. Now. Before Bixie could comply, the human ship broadcast its message. It came through on all frequencies, in perfect galactic standard, delivered in a deep, gravelly voice that sent chills down her spine. This is Captain Jeremiah Park of the Tints Humanity's Pride to the Galactic Armada. There was a pause, and Bixie felt her blood run cold as she recognized the name. Park, the infamous veteran of the Girish Wars, the man who had single-handedly ended the Mars Rebellion. You are illegally blockading sovereign human space. You will move your vessels, or they will be moved. You have 5 minutes to comply. The bridge of the crash course erupted in activity as the message finished. Bixie watched as Admiral Rax's hologram materialized in the ready room. The Admiral's moisture suit was pristine, but his posture betrayed his agitation. Park, Rax hissed the name like a curse. Of course they would send him. The butcher of Garish Centauri himself. Sir, Bixie interjected, reports indicate he's never actually lost a battle. There's always a first time, Rax snarled. One ship won and they think to challenge the entire armada. Captain Nex, prepare your vessel for combat. All ships, battle formations. We will show these Deathworlders why the Galactic Armada has kept peace for 10,000 cycles. Bixie felt a chill run down her spine as she studied the tactical display. The human vessel was now fully emerged, its true scale finally apparent. It stretched nearly 50 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull marked with what appeared to be battle scars. No, she realized with a start, those were landing bays. Hundreds of them. Sir, she addressed Captain Nex. Preliminary analysis suggests their ship has more fighter capacity than our entire carrier group. Noted, First Officer Nex replied, his tone grim. Take your station. Sound battle stations. As Bixie moved to comply, Admiral Rax's voice boomed across all channels. This is Admiral Rax of the Galactic Armada to the rogue human vessel. You are in violation of multiple treaties. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded or face immediate destruction. You have 2 minutes to comply. The response was immediate. A low, dangerous chuckle came across the channel, the kind of laugh that had preceded the destruction of entire fleets in the Garish Wars. Captain Park's voice followed, carrying the weight of countless victories. Admiral, let me be clear, this isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy notice. I've destroyed fleets before. Yours won't be the last. The tactical display suddenly blazed with new information as the human vessel's weapon systems fully activated. Bixie felt her skin grow cold as she read the energy outputs. Their entire fleet's combined firepower might scratch the paint on that monster. All hands, she called out, her voice surprisingly steady. Battle stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. As the klaxons blared throughout the ship, Bixie couldn't help but notice that the human vessel's name seemed particularly appropriate. If this was humanity's pride, she dreaded to think what their wrath might look like. She was about to find out. The first shot didn't come from the humanity's pride. It came from a young, nervous weapons officer on the destroyer Swift Victory, 3 ships down from the crash course's position. The missile streaked across space, a bright purple trail marking its progress toward the massive human vessel. Bixie watched it approach on the tactical display, all 4 hands gripping her station's railing. Time seemed to slow as the missile, their most advanced anti-capital ship weapon, crossed the void. It never got within 5 kilometers of the human ship. A brief flash of light, barely visible on their sensors, and the missile simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris. Just gone. Point Defense Systems, Bax reported from his station, voice trembling. But there's no energy signature, no conventional weapons fire. They just unraveled it somehow. Before anyone could process this information, Captain Park's voice came across all channels again. "I believe that counts as a declaration of hostile intent." He sounded almost bored. "Very well. What happened next would be debated in military academies for centuries to come, assuming anyone survived to teach those classes." The Humanities Pride's weapon systems activated in a synchronized dance that Bixie could only describe as beautiful, in the way that supernovas were beautiful, magnificent, awe-inspiring, and absolutely lethal. Multiple targeting locks. Back screamed. They're targeting every ship in the fleet simultaneously." "Impossible," Captain Nex barked. "No targeting system can." The rest of his sentence was lost as space itself seemed to ignite. Beams of coherent energy, each powerful enough to crack a small moon, lanced out from the human vessel in all directions. They moved in patterns that defied physics, curving and weaving around friendly ships to strike their targets. 3 cruisers near the crash course simply vanished, transformed into expanding clouds of plasma. On the tactical display, Bixie watched in horror as dozens, then hundreds of ships registered direct hits. Their most advanced shields, designed to withstand bombardment from entire battle groups, failed in microseconds. "Evasive maneuvers," Nex ordered. "All power to shields. Launch countermeasures." The crash course's engine screamed as they pushed the ship into a spiral dodge pattern. Around them, the neat formation of the Galactic Armada dissolved into chaos as 10,000 ships tried to avoid the impossible targeting systems of humanity's flagship. "Sir," Bixie reported, fighting to keep her voice steady, "we've lost contact with Admiral Rax's flagship. 15% of the fleet is no longer registering on sensors." Another barrage from the human vessel illuminated space. This time, Bixie noticed something even more terrifying. They weren't using the same weapon twice. Each attack seemed to employ different technology, different principles of physics. It was as if they were showcasing their arsenal, demonstrating just how outmatched the Armada truly was. "They're testing our defenses," she realized aloud. "Every shot is designed to gather data on our shield harmonics, our evasion patterns, our hull compositions." "Clever girl." Captain Park's voice cut through their command channel, a channel that should have been encrypted beyond any possibility of interception. "I was wondering if anyone would notice. Would you believe we actually developed most of these weapons specifically for this encounter? Had to do something during all those years you tried to contain us." A new type of weapon speared out from the human vessel, crystalline structures that seemed to grow through space itself, encasing ships in lattices of some unknown material. Ships touched by the crystals didn't explode. They simply went dark, their crews trapped inside as their power systems failed. Captain Bax called out, "Analysis suggests they're deliberately leaving some ships intact. They're being selective about which vessels they destroy and which they disable." Bixie felt her blood run cold as she overlaid the pattern of destroyed versus disabled ships. There was indeed a pattern. They were specifically targeting older vessels for destruction, while preserving ships with more advanced technology. This wasn't just a battle. It was a shopping trip. All ships. Admiral Rax's voice suddenly cut through the chaos. He had survived after all. "Concentrate fire on their primary weapon nodes." Coordinate targeting through a new beam lanced out from Humanity's Pride, so bright it overwhelmed the crash course's filters. When Bixie could see again, Admiral Rax's new position was marked by an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. "I do wish you'd all stop interrupting my collection process," Park commented casually. "Now, about that fascinating sensor suite your ship is carrying, First Officer Bixie, I think we'll be having a closer look at that very soon." Bixie looked at her captain, then back at the tactical display where thousands of ships were dying or being disabled in perfectly calculated patterns. She had a terrible feeling she knew exactly what Park meant by closer look. The boarding was about to begin. "Surround them." The order came from Commodore Vec, the highest-ranking officer still alive after the destruction of Admiral Rax's second command ship. "They can't possibly track targets in all directions simultaneously." Bixie watched the tactical display as the remaining ships of the Armada, still nearly 8,000 strong, attempted to encircle the Humanity's Pride. The massive human vessel hung in space like a predator, seemingly unconcerned as the fleet moved to create a perfect sphere around it. "Status report," Captain Nex demanded, his moisture suit working overtime to combat his stress. 7,842 ships still operational," Bixie reported, her lower hands flying across her console while her upper hands maintained stability in the artificial gravity fluctuations. 1,113 vessels disabled but intact. 997 destroyed with all hands. Energy spike. Bax shouted from his station. They're charging everything. The sensor readings made Bixie's head hurt. The human vessel's power output was climbing beyond anything their instruments could accurately measure. It was as if a small star had suddenly appeared in their midst. All ships fire on my mark. Commodore Vex's voice crackled through the command channel. Concentrate everything on their primary hull. Their shields can't possibly, Captain Park's calm voice interrupted, cutting through all encryption as if it didn't exist. I'm actually glad you're trying this. We were hoping to test our point defense systems at full capacity. The Armada opened fire. Thousands of ships unleashed their full arsenal simultaneously. Energy weapons of every known type, missiles carrying payloads that could crack planets, exotic particle beams that could theoretically pierce any known defense. Everything humanity's enemies had developed over 10,000 cycles of warfare poured toward the singular target. It was like throwing pebbles at a mountain. The space around humanity's pride lit up with countless tiny flashes as its point defense grid activated. Missiles vanished microseconds after launching. Energy beams were bent away at impossible angles, sometimes reflected back at their sources. Particle weapons simply ceased to exist halfway to their target. That's Bax's voice cracked. That's impossible. They're tracking and countering millions of incoming projectiles simultaneously. The computational power alone would require a quantum AI network spread across the entire hull. Park's voice came through again, sounding amused. Yes, that's exactly what it required. Though I should mention, this is actually putting a slight strain on our systems. We might need to end this soon. The human vessel's response began with what looked like ripples across its hull, waves of energy that pulsed outward in all directions. Ships caught in the waves didn't explode. Their crews watched in horror as their most powerful shields simply winked out of existence. Shield harmonics are gone, Tix shouted from her station. They've somehow erased our shield frequencies from existence. We're all exposed. Now then, Park continued conversationally, let me demonstrate what actual fleet-killing weapons look like. The Humanity's Pride's hull split open in countless places, revealing what looked like crystalline growths beneath. Energy began to build up in these structures, creating a lattice of light between them. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Commodore Vex screamed. Break formation. Scatter. Scat, the lattice of light exploded outward. Where before the human ship had been firing individual weapons, now it released what looked like a solid sphere of pure energy, expanding outward at near relativistic speeds. Ships in its path didn't have time to evade. Bixie watched the tactical display in horror as nearly 1,000 ships simply ceased to exist in the first second. The wave continued outward, consuming everything in its path, except, she noticed with a chill, those ships that had been marked for capture in the earlier attack pattern. Fascinating technology you're using in the Crash Course's sensor suite, Park commented as if they were discussing the weather. The way it's analyzing our attack right now, yes, we'll definitely want to take a closer look at that. Helm, bring us about. Let's pay First Officer Bixie and her crew a visit. The massive human vessel began to turn toward them with that same impossible grace it had shown earlier. Around it, the remnants of the greatest fleet ever assembled fled in terror or died in silence. Captain, Bixie said quietly, I believe we're about to have company. The last thing she saw on the tactical display before it overloaded was the Humanity's Pride launching what appeared to be boarding craft, each one larger than the Crash Course itself. The boarding craft emerging from Humanity's Pride didn't look like anything Bixie had ever seen in her military career. They moved like living things, their hulls rippling with the same crystalline technology that had devastated the fleet moments ago. Each one was massive, big enough to carry an entire invasion force. Multiple targets on intercept course, Bax reported, his voice steady despite his moisture suit's obvious strain keeping up with his fear response. Counting 15, no 20 boarding craft. They're not all heading for us. Tactical analysis, Captain Nex demanded. Bixie studied her readings. Sir, they appear to be targeting specific vessels. The Stellar Forge for its manufacturing facilities, the Mind's Eye for its AI research banks, and she paused. 5 other ships, each with unique technological advantages. Transmission from the lead boarding craft, Tix announced, her lower hands trembling. Put it through, Nex ordered. This is Commander Bruce Sears of the Human Expeditionary Force. The voice was deep, gravelly, carrying the weight of countless boarding actions and close-quarters victories. Bixie felt her blood run cold. Even out here in the depths of space, they'd heard of Bruce Sears, the man who had single-handedly captured the Girishan dreadnought Final Word with nothing but a boarding suit and a combat knife. You've seen what our ship-to-ship weapons can do. Don't make me come in there and demonstrate why I've never needed them. The first signs of what that meant came from the Stellar Forge. Its captain had apparently decided to resist. They watched on long-range sensors as human boarding craft attached themselves to its hull. There was no cutting, no explosive breach. The crystalline technology simply merged with the target ship's hull, creating pristine doorways where solid metal had been moments before. By the void, Bax whispered, they're not even using force fields to contain our atmosphere. They're somehow maintaining the molecular structure of our hulls while opening them. The Stellar Forge's security teams never stood a chance. Surveillance feeds showed human troops entering in what looked like powered armor suits, but they moved like they weren't wearing any protection at all. At their head was a figure that could only be Sears himself, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. The alien standard-issue plasma rifles might as well have been throwing sparks at a battleship. Security feeds from multiple vessels, Tix reported, horror creeping into her voice. They're not even killing anyone. They're using some kind of targeted electromagnetic pulse. Everyone they hit just falls asleep. Efficient Park's voice cut in again, making everyone on the bridge jump. We did want the engineering and technical crews intact for questioning later. Speaking of which, Commander Sears, how's your progress? 6 vessels secured, Captain. Could have done it faster, but you said you wanted them intact. Sears' response carried a hint of amusement. The crash course is about to receive a personal visit. Bixie watched as 3 of the massive boarding craft broke off from the main group and moved to surround their ship. The crystalline structures on their hulls began to glow with that same impossible energy they'd witnessed earlier. Captain, she said, turning to Nex, standard combat protocols won't work against this. They're not just technologically superior, they're operating on principles of physics we don't even understand. Options, First Officer. Nex asked, all 4 arms clasped behind his back as he faced the viewing screen with dignity. Bixie began, but stopped as she saw something new on her tactical display. Sir, they're launching smaller craft from the boarding vessels. Hundreds of them. The smaller craft were about the size of shuttles, but they moved like fighter craft on steroids. They took up perfect holding positions around the crash course, creating a 3-dimensional grid that hummed with energy. Last chance, Commander Sears' voice came through again, somehow managing to sound both casual and terrifying. Your ship has been targeted for acquisition due to its advanced sensor capabilities. Surrender now, and I won't have to demonstrate the close-quarters combat techniques that earned me the nickname, the Ghost of Girish. Trust me, you don't want to know how I got that name. Captain Nex looked at his bridge crew, then at the tactical display showing the utter devastation of their fleet still ongoing in the background. First Officer Bixie, send our surrender signal. Let's not add our crew to today's casualties. Smart move, Sears replied. Then, with a chuckle that sent chills down Bixie's spine, now about that sensor suite, my engineers are quite excited to take it apart. Don't worry, we're very good at putting things back together, usually. As the crystalline boarding tubes began to form against their hull, Bixie realized that the most terrifying thing wasn't the humans' overwhelming technology or their tactical superiority. It was the fact that they had sent their most feared boarding specialist just to collect one sensor suite. Whatever the humans were planning, this was clearly just the beginning. All surviving vessels, execute emergency protocol Omega. Scatter and jump to emergency coordinates. The desperate order came from Captain Lax of the Star Dancer, now the highest-ranking officer still in command of an operational vessel. We must preserve some portion of the fleet. From her position on the crash course's bridge, now surrounded by crystalline boarding tubes but not yet breached, Bixie watched the chaos unfold. The remnants of the once proud Armada, still nearly 4,000 ships strong, engaged their FTL drives simultaneously. Nothing happened. Madam Bax reported, his voice cracking, detecting some kind of spatial distortion field. It's massive, encompassing the entire battle zone. Impossible, Captain Nex whispered. No civilization has ever managed to create an FTL interdiction field larger than a few thousand kilometers. The power requirements alone would require roughly the output of a small star. Captain Park's voice cut in, sounding almost professorial. Yes, that was quite the engineering challenge. Took us nearly 3 years to solve that one. Would you like to know how we did it? Before anyone could respond, new energy readings blazed across Bixie's tactical display. The Humanity's Pride's hull was shifting again, revealing what looked like massive crystalline formations that pulsed with dark energy. The field generators are actually quite elegant. Park continued conversationally. They create a cascade effect through subspace, using the mass of the trapped ships themselves to help power the containment field. The more ships try to escape, the stronger the field becomes. Neat, isn't it? Bixie watched in horror as ship after ship attempted emergency jumps, each failed attempt actually strengthening the invisible cage that held them. The tactical display showed the field's strength increasing exponentially. "Captain," she reported, "at current rates, the field will be strong enough to prevent FTL travel in this sector for the next standard month, even if the generators are deactivated." Speaking of preventing escape, Commander Sears' voice joined the channel. "My boarding teams report that the Stellar Forge's manufacturing data has been successfully copied. Beginning Phase 2 of collection operations." The human boarding craft still attached to various ships throughout the fleet suddenly changed color, their crystalline structures shifting from blue to a deep, pulsing red. Ships that had been disabled but largely intact began experiencing systematic power failures. "What's happening?" Captain Next demanded as reports flooded in. "They're not just copying our data," Bixie realized, watching the pattern emerge on her displays. "They're using the boarding tubes to inject some kind of viral code into our systems. They're taking control of our ships remotely." "Very good," First Officer Clarke commented. "I see why Commander Sears was so interested in your sensor suite. Yes, we're assuming direct control of select vessels. Your technology may be inferior to ours, but some of your innovations are interesting. We'll be keeping a few samples." The tactical display showed hundreds of ships going dark, their crews helpless as human control systems overwrote their command protocols. Those that resisted found their weapons and life support systems quickly compromised. "This is Captain Lax to all ships." The Star Dancer's commander's voice was edged with panic now. "Initiate core breaches. Don't let them take our technology." "Oh, please don't do that," Park sighed. "Commander Sears gets very annoyed when people damage the technology he's trying to collect." "You wouldn't like him when he's annoyed," Ken confirmed, Sears added, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of countless boarding actions. "Last time someone tried to scuttle their ship rather than surrender, I had to get creative. The rescue crews are still having nightmares." Bixie watched as the Star Dancer attempted to overload its core. The process got exactly 2.3 seconds in before the ship's systems locked up completely. Across the fleet, similar attempts at self-destruction were being casually swatted aside by human control systems. "Fascinating design on these reactor systems," Park noted. "Quite efficient if primitive. We'll definitely be studying these." "Oh, and speaking of studying things, Commander Sears, I believe it's time to collect that sensor suite we discussed." "Acknowledged, Captain. Beginning final approach to the crash course now." Through the bridge viewport, Bixie could see the crystalline boarding tubes beginning to pulse with energy. The humans were about to claim their prize, and there wasn't a thing they could do about it. "Captain," she said quietly to Nex, "I believe we're about to learn exactly how Commander Sears earned his reputation." As if in response, the ship's internal cameras began showing armored figures materializing directly through the hull plates, bypassing all security checkpoints. The legend of Bruce Sears was about to become very, very personal, the first sign that Commander Sears had entered the ship wasn't an explosion, a breach alarm, or even a security alert. It was silence. Complete and utter silence as every system on the crash course simultaneously went dark. "Emergency power." Captain Nex barked into the darkness. Nothing happened. "They've isolated every system," Bixie reported, her auxiliary display running on its own backup battery. "Power, life support, artificial gravity, weapons, comms, they're all operating independently now. We're being dissected electronically while we're still running." The lights came back on, but they were different. A soft blue glow emanating from crystalline growths that definitely hadn't been there before. The effect was almost beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way. "Security teams report contact on decks 3, 7, and 12, Tix announced, her voice shaking. "No weapons fire. They're just walking through the walls. Our barriers mean nothing to them." Through the ship's internal cameras, now apparently operating on human power, Bixie watched the boarding action unfold. The human troops moved with inhuman precision, their armor seeming to flow like liquid metal. But it was their leader who drew everyone's attention. Commander Sears wasn't wearing the same armor as his troops. His suit was darker, more predatory in design, and seemed to bend light around it in unsettling ways. He moved like a shadow given form, passing through solid barriers as if they were mist. Security team on Deck 3 is down, Bax reported. No casualties. They're unconscious. Deck 7 team reports. He paused, swallowing hard. Reports Commander Sears smiled at them. They surrendered immediately. Smart of them, Sears' voice echoed through the bridge speakers. Always appreciate it when people make the rational choice. Makes my job easier. Speaking of which, the bridge doors didn't slide open or explode inward. They simply ceased to exist, replaced by a swirling vortex of crystalline energy. Through it stepped Commander Sears, flanked by 2 troops whose armor rippled with barely contained power. Captain Nex, First Officer Bixie. Sears nodded casually, as if he were arriving for a scheduled meeting. Hope you don't mind us dropping in. We've got a tight schedule to keep, lots more ships to collect today. Bixie found herself studying the legendary human up close. His armor seemed to drink in the light, and she could swear she saw stars swirling in its surface. The stories didn't do him justice. He wasn't just intimidating, he was otherworldly. Your reputation precedes you, Commander, Captain Nex said with dignity, all 4 arms clasped behind his back. I trust you'll treat my crew with respect. Always do, Captain. It's one of the reasons I'm still allowed to lead boarding actions. Sears gestured, and his troops began setting up crystalline devices around the bridge. After that business with the final word, some people thought I might be a bit too enthusiastic. But I maintain that any boarding that ends with everyone still breathing is a good boarding. The final word, Bixie couldn't help herself. The stories say you captured it single-handedly. That's impossible, even for a human. Sears turned to her, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Strictly speaking, I had both hands free for most of it. The knife only occupied one. He focused on her station. But we can trade war stories later. Right now, I'm more interested in this sensor suite of yours. Beautiful piece of engineering. Mind walking me through how it works? You're asking? Tix blurted out. You could just take it. Could, Sears agreed. But in my experience, technology works better when you understand it properly. Besides, he added, his armor briefly rippling with that star-filled pattern again, I find that people are much more cooperative when you treat them with professional courtesy. As if to demonstrate his point, the crystalline devices his troops had placed began to pulse, and Bixie felt the artificial gravity shift slightly. We're creating a localized bubble of normal space, Sears explained. When we disconnect your sensor suite, it'll keep working perfectly. No point in damaging something we want to study, right? The gravity stabilizers, Bixie found herself saying, her professional curiosity overriding her fear. They're quantum locked to prevent interference. How did you? Quantum locking. Cute solution. We went through that phase about 80 years ago. Here, let me show you something interesting. Sears moved to her station, bringing up a holographic display she hadn't even known her system could generate. For the next 20 minutes, as his troops systematically secured the ship and prepared key systems for removal, Commander Sears engaged in a detailed technical discussion with Bixie about sensor technology, quantum mechanics, and the various approaches their civilizations had taken to solving similar problems. It was, Bixie would later reflect, perhaps the most surreal experience of her life, having a friendly chat about engineering with the galaxy's most feared boarding specialist while he casually conquered her ship. Well, this has been enlightening, Sears finally said, checking something on a display that appeared in mid-air. Captain Parks finished his collection run. Time to wrap this up. He turned to Captain Nex. Captain, your ship is now officially part of the Human Engineering Analysis Fleet. Don't worry, we'll take good care of her. As if to punctuate his words, the entire ship shuddered slightly as crystalline growth spread through its corridors, transforming the crash course from the inside out. Oh, and First Officer Bixie, Sears added as he turned to leave. We've got some interesting projects coming up in our RD division. Once this whole conquest thing is sorted out, you might want to submit an application. We're always looking for people who ask the right questions. With that, he stepped back through the swirling vortex that had replaced their bridge door, leaving behind a very confused but somehow still professionally intrigued first officer. The galaxy's most terrifying boarding specialist had just offered her a job. This was turning out to be a very strange day indeed. The crash course's bridge looked both familiar and alien now. Crystal formations had spread throughout the space, integrating with their existing systems in ways that defied conventional engineering. Bixie found herself studying the interfaces with professional fascination, even as she remained acutely aware of their status as prisoners. Remarkable, she murmured, watching her sensor displays now operating with human modifications. The clarity was unprecedented. She could see details of the ongoing battle that her systems shouldn't have been capable of detecting. They're not just using our technology, they're improving it in real time. First Officer Captain Nex said quietly, "Perhaps you could focus less on admiring their engineering and more on our tactical situation." "That's exactly what she's doing, Captain." Commander Sears' voice came through their newly crystalline comm system. He had left the bridge but was apparently still monitoring them. "Your first officer has already figured out that the best way to understand your tactical situation is to study how we interface with your technology." Smart woman. The sensor display suddenly expanded, showing a three-dimensional view of the battle that made their previous tactical systems look primitive by comparison. The remaining Armada ships were scattered across space, some still futilely attempting to escape, others simply drifting powerless. "Watch carefully," Park's voice joined the channel. "This is where it gets interesting." "Commander Sears, is the Crash Course's sensor suite fully integrated?" "Yes, sir." First Officer Bixie's systems are now providing data to the fleet network. "Have to say, Captain, she's got some impressive innovations here. These quantum resonance filters. Very clever." Bixie felt a strange mix of pride and embarrassment at having her work praised by the people who had just conquered her ship. The feeling was quickly overshadowed by awe as she watched what happened next. The humanity's pride began to move again, but differently this time. Its massive hull seemed to flow like liquid metal, reconfiguring itself into new patterns. Weapon systems that had been dormant until now came online, making their previous displays of firepower look like warm-up exercises. "Beginning final collection phase," Park announced, sounding almost cheerful. "Commander Sears, please ensure our new guests have a good view. They should see what their sensor technology can really do when properly applied." The display shifted again, now showing details Bixie hadn't even known could be detected. She could see the quantum state of every ship's drive system, the exact composition of their hull alloys, even the stress patterns in their structural supports. "Are you copying our sensor algorithms?" she asked, unable to contain her professional curiosity. "More like completing them," Sears replied. "You are on the right track with several theories, but your computing systems couldn't handle the full calculations. We're showing you what your own technology can do when backed by proper processing power." As if to demonstrate, the display zoomed in on one of the fleeing ships. Bixie could see every detail of its operation, from the microfractures in its hull to the exact frequency of its power fluctuations. The humans weren't just defeating the Armada, they were analyzing it down to the atomic level. "Fascinating reading material, isn't it?" Park commented. "We'll be studying these design principles for years. Some of your approaches are quite innovative, if limited by your technology." Speaking of which, the humanity's pride unleashed another barrage, but this time Bixie could see exactly what was happening. Each weapon was precisely calibrated to the structural and technological characteristics of its target, using data gathered by her own sensor systems. The efficiency she breathed, watching ships disabled with surgical precision. "You're not just shooting them. You're using their own design specifications against them." "Indeed," Sears confirmed. "Your sensor suite helped us fine-tune our targeting algorithms. Each ship is being disabled in the most efficient way possible, preserving the exact systems we want to study while neutralizing their ability to resist." Captain Nex shifted uncomfortably beside her. "First Officer, need I remind you that you're providing tactical analysis to the enemy?" "Oh, Captain," Park's voice carried a hint of amusement. "I think we're well past that point. Besides, we already had all this information. What we're doing now is showing proper professional respect to the engineer whose work helped refine our collection process." The display showed the final phase of the battle in perfect clarity. Ships were being systematically disabled and collected, their crews contained, their technology preserved for study. It was less a battle now and more a carefully orchestrated technological harvest. "By the way," First Officer Bixie, Sears added casually as they watched, "I've forwarded your sensor suite documentation to our RD division. They're quite impressed. That job offer is looking more likely by the minute." Bixie found herself in the surreal position of watching her civilization's greatest fleet being dismantled with the help of her own innovations, while simultaneously feeling a strange sense of professional satisfaction. The humans weren't just defeating them, they were proving that her theories had been right all along. It was, she had to admit, a uniquely humbling yet validating experience. "This is Acting Fleet Commander Vec of the Burning Light to all remaining combat-capable vessels The transmission cut through all channels, carrying the weight of desperate determination. Form up on my position. If we concentrate our fire on their primary weapon nodes, we might. Oh, not this again, Captain Park's voice interrupted with a sigh. Commander Sears, how many ships have we collected so far? 842 intact vessels secured, sir. Engineering teams report excellent preservation of target technologies. Though I must say, First Officer Bixie's sensor suite is still the prize of the collection. Bixie felt that strange mix of pride and embarrassment again as she watched the enhanced tactical display. The remaining Armada ships, still nearly 2,000 strong, were attempting to form a new attack pattern. Their movements were precise, desperate, and completely futile. They're trying to create a resonance cascade, she observed, studying the formation. Using their shield harmonics to generate a feedback loop. It's actually quite clever. Agreed, Park replied. A shame it won't work against our crystalline hull configuration, but the theory is sound. Commander Vec is proving to be quite resourceful. Almost hate to disappoint him. The Humanity's Pride's hull began to shift again, its surface rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. Weapon ports that had remained dormant throughout the battle started to glow with internal energy. Now then, Park announced to all channels, I believe it's time to demonstrate what our weapons can do when we're not holding back to preserve technology. Commander Vec, I appreciate your tactical creativity, but this has gone on long enough. The human vessel's response began with what looked like a wave of pure darkness flowing across its hull. Bixie's enhanced sensors registered energy readings that made her previous measurements look like rounding errors. By the void, Captain Nex whispered beside her. They were just playing with us before. Not playing, Captain Sears corrected. We were being careful, surgical. Now we're being efficient. The Humanity's Pride opened fire with its full arsenal. The difference was like comparing a surgical laser to a supernova. Ships didn't just die, they ceased to exist at a quantum level. Matter itself was being selectively erased from space-time. These readings can't be right, Bixie said, checking and rechecking her displays. They're not just destroying ships, they're altering the underlying structure of reality around their targets. Quantum deletion fields, Park explained casually. We found they work much better than conventional weapons for large-scale fleet engagements. Though I must admit, your sensor suite is providing some fascinating new data on the process. The quantum wake patterns are particularly interesting. Vec's desperate last stand lasted exactly 47 seconds. In that time, Bixie watched nearly 1,000 ships simply vanish from existence. The only vessels that survived were those the humans had specifically marked for preservation. Collection teams move in, Park ordered. Let's wrap this up. We have several other systems to visit today, and I promised my crew we'd be home in time for dinner. Through the crystalline enhanced viewport, Bixie watched as the remains of the greatest fleet ever assembled either drifted powerless or disappeared into quantum oblivion. Humanity's Pride hung in space like a predator that had finally stopped toying with its prey. You know what the really interesting part is, Sears commented, apparently still monitoring their bridge. This ship isn't even our newest model. It's just the one we had available for this sector. Bixie felt her blood run cold. Not your newest? Oh no, Park confirmed cheerfully. The Humanity's Pride is practically a museum piece compared to what's coming off the production lines now. Speaking of which, new contacts began appearing on the tactical display. Massive human vessels emerging from FTLAL at key points throughout the sector. Each one made the Humanity's Pride look positively primitive by comparison. Ah, right on schedule, Park noted. The actual invasion fleet is arriving. We were just the advance party, you see. Had to clear the space and collect some interesting technology samples. Bixie looked at her captain, then back at the tactical display where dozens of human super ships were now taking up strategic positions. She had just watched the most powerful fleet in galactic history be casually dismantled by what the humans considered obsolete technology. First Officer, Captain Nex said quietly, I believe now might be a good time to seriously consider Commander Sears' job offer. For once, Bixie couldn't find any reason to disagree with her captain's assessment. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. Bixie watched in amazement as hundreds of vessels launched from the Humanity's Pride. Not weapons platforms or boarding craft this time, but rescue ships. Beginning search and rescue operations, Park announced on all frequencies. All surviving vessels, maintain position. Medical teams are inbound. I repeat, maintain position and prepare to receive emergency medical assistance. The tactical display, still enhanced by human crystalline technology, showed the full scope of the rescue operation. Each human shuttle was equipped with medical facilities that made the Armada's best trauma centers look primitive. First Officer, Commander Sears' voice came through their bridge systems. We could use your help coordinating rescue efforts. Your sensor suite's giving us excellent readings on survivor locations and conditions. I, of course, Bixie replied, somewhat startled by the request. She began directing her enhanced sensors toward the debris field, looking for life signs among the wreckage. Picking up multiple survivors in Grid 7. Their moisture suits are failing. Medical Team 12, rerouting to those coordinates, Park responded. Good catch, First Officer. Those environmental suits of yours are quite vulnerable to vacuum exposure. Our medical ships are equipped with emergency hydration facilities. Through the viewport, Bixie could see the rescue ships at work. They moved with the same impossible grace as their warships, using modified versions of their boarding technology to extract survivors safely from damaged vessels. The crystalline technology that had been so terrifying in combat was now carefully preserving life support in failing ship sections. Sir Bax reported from his station, now partly crystalline like everything else. I'm reading over 2,000 survivors being rescued. Their medical technology, it's incredible. They're treating injuries I wouldn't have thought survivable. Standard emergency response protocols, Sears explained casually. Can't very well take over a galaxy if we let everyone die in the process. Bad for morale, you understand. A new hologram appeared on their bridge, a real-time view of one of the medical ship's interior. Bixie watched as human doctors worked alongside medical robots, treating injured crew members from dozens of different species. They weren't just stabilizing the wounded, they were healing injuries completely using technology that seemed to rewrite biology itself. That's impossible, Captain Nex said, watching a critically injured crew member's wounds literally reverse themselves. Those injuries were fatal, only by your medical standards. Park replied, we've had to become very good at treating trauma injuries. Deathworld evolution tends to make us rather durable, and our medical technology had to keep up. Incoming transmission from Medical Ship 17, Tix announced. They're requesting information about species-specific environmental requirements. They want to ensure proper atmospheric conditions for each survivor. Send them everything we have, Captain Nex ordered, then added with a touch of irony, with First Officer Bixie's enhanced sensor suite. I'm sure the data will be quite comprehensive. Bixie coordinated with the rescue efforts, using her newly upgraded systems to direct medical ships to survivors and provide vital data about their conditions. The humans worked with incredible efficiency, but also with a level of care she hadn't expected from a species capable of such destruction. You seem surprised by our medical capabilities, Sears observed. Did you think we only developed weapons? I suppose I did, Bixie admitted, watching another group of survivors being treated. Your combat technology was so far beyond ours I assumed that we focused solely on warfare. Park finished for her. Quite the opposite. You don't survive on a death world by only learning how to kill. You have to become equally good at healing, at preserving life in hostile conditions. Everything we developed for combat has a peaceful application, even these crystals your ship is now infused with. As if to demonstrate, the crystalline growths throughout the bridge pulsed softly, and Bixie felt her moisture suit's environmental controls upgrade themselves. The comfort level was beyond anything she'd experienced. Speaking of which, Sears added, how's the new suit interface working? We adapted our environmental control systems to your physiology. Should be much more efficient now. Bixie realized that her chronic dryness problem had completely disappeared. The humans hadn't just conquered them, they'd casually solved comfort issues her species had struggled with for generations. Thank you, she said quietly, watching another group of survivors being rescued. For saving them. You didn't have to. Of course we did, Park replied simply. Some species might be content to rule over ashes, to burn everything down just to say they're king of the ruins. But what's the point of becoming the most powerful species in the galaxy if you can't also be the most compassionate? Power without purpose is just destruction, and humanity has much bigger plans than that. As she continued coordinating rescue efforts, Bixie began to understand something crucial about humanity. They weren't just conquerors or warriors, they were something far more interesting. They were builders, healers, and destroyers all at once, and they seemed to excel at every role they chose to take. It was, she had to admit, a rather compelling argument for accepting that job offer. The rescue operations were still ongoing when Captain Park opened a broadcast channel to every inhabited world in known space. Bixie watched from the crash course's crystalline enhanced bridge as his image appeared on every screen, every holographic projector, and every communications device across the galaxy. "This is Captain Jeremiah Park of the Tins, humanity's pride to all galactic civilizations," he began, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who knew they held all the cards. "As you may have already learned, the Galactic Armada has been retired. Humanity is now assuming responsibility for galactic security and technological advancement." Before any government could formulate a response, new alerts began flooding Bixie's sensor displays. Massive energy signatures were appearing over every major world in the galaxy. The readings were familiar now. She'd seen them before, just prior to the Humanity's Pride's arrival. "Detecting FTL emergence events," she reported, somewhat unnecessarily since everyone could see it happening. "Similar vessel signatures to, no, actually far more advanced than the Humanity's Pride. They're appearing over every capital city, every major fleet base, every strategic location simultaneously." "Quite right," Commander Sears commented, his hologram appearing on their bridge. "The Pride might be a museum piece, but she did her job, kept everyone distracted while we positioned our actual fleet." The tactical display showed hundreds of human super ships taking up strategic positions throughout the galaxy. Each one made the Humanity's Pride look obsolete, their crystalline hulls gleaming with technologies even more advanced than what Bixie had witnessed today. "For those wondering how we managed this," Park continued his broadcast, "the answer is simple. While you tried to contain us, to limit our growth, we were preparing. Every restriction you placed on us became a challenge to overcome. Every technology you denied us, we developed independently, usually discovering better solutions in the process." New data streamed across Bixie's console as the human ships began transmitting their specifications openly. They weren't even trying to hide their capabilities anymore. The sheer scale of human technological advancement was staggering. "Those blockade ships you stationed around Earth," Park's voice carried a hint of amusement now. "We used them as benchmarks for our development. Each new ship class we designed had to be capable of defeating the entire blockade fleet single-handedly. The Humanity's Pride was actually our prototype, the first one to meet that standard. Everything that came after her was significantly more capable." As if to demonstrate this point, one of the newer vessels over a distant core world casually reached out with a beam of crystal energy and deactivated an entire planetary defense grid. Not destroyed, simply turned it off, as easily as flicking a switch. "We would have preferred to join the galactic community peacefully," Park continued. "But you made it clear that wouldn't be permitted. So instead, we prepared for this day. While you watched our surface shipyards, our actual production facilities were buried inside gas giants and stellar cores. While you monitored our system traffic, our real fleet exercises were conducted in artificial pocket universes. While you counted our ships, we were building automated factories that could produce super dreadnoughts faster than you could build shuttlecraft." The responses began pouring in, not resistance or defiance, but surrender announcements from virtually every major power in the galaxy. They had all just watched their combined fleet get systematically dismantled by an obsolete human warship. No one wanted to face the current generation. "Smart," Sears commented, watching the surrender messages flood in. "Always appreciate it when people make the rational choice." Sir Tix reported from her station, receiving transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting terms." "Already sent," Park replied. "Along with our plans for technological integration, medical aid distribution, and infrastructure upgrades. Did you think we spent all this time just building weapons?" Bixie studied the proposed terms as they appeared on her screen. They were surprisingly reasonable. The humans weren't demanding subjugation or revenge. They were offering advancement, protection, and partnership, albeit with the clear understanding that they were now firmly in charge. A final note, Park's broadcast concluded. "To the various species who served in the Armada today, we've been extremely impressed by certain technological innovations we've encountered. Expect recruitment offers soon. Humanity believes in rewarding excellence, regardless of its origin." He glanced directly at Bixie through the broadcast. "After all, if we're going to advance galactic civilization, we're going to need the best minds from every species. The age of artificial division is over. The age of human-led unity begins now." The broadcast ended, but the messages kept pouring in. Surrenders, acceptances, and increasingly, expressions of relief and cautious optimism. As Bixie watched the responses flood her enhanced displays, she realized that the galaxy had just fundamentally changed, and perhaps, despite the shocking display of force that had initiated it, it might have changed for the better. The debris field from the battle was still being cleared when they arrived. 50 massive ships, each one making the humanity's pride look like a museum piece, which, as Bixie now knew, it technically was. They emerged from FTL in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls gleaming with technologies that made even their recent display of power seem primitive. "Ah, right on schedule," Park announced. "The actual invasion fleet for this sector has arrived. Commander Sears, status report on our collection efforts." "All target technologies secured, sir. Engineering teams are already implementing improvements based on First Officer Bixie's sensor innovations." Speaking of which, Sears' hologram turned to face her. "Have you had a chance to review the job offer?" Bixie looked at the document displayed on her crystalline enhanced console. The humans weren't just offering her a position, they were offering her an entire research division. "This is generous," she managed. "We reward excellence," Park replied simply. "Your understanding of quantum sensor mechanics is impressive, even if you were limited by your civilization's technology. Imagine what you could do with proper resources." The tactical display showed more human vessels arriving in other sectors. Not merely warships, but massive engineering platforms, medical ships, and research vessels. They had prepared for every aspect of governing a galaxy. Sir Bax reported, his voice filled with awe, reading quantum wake signatures from their new vessels. They're using localized reality manipulation as casual propulsion. The power requirements alone should be impossible." Sears finished for him. "You'll find humans have a rather different definition of that word. We tend to treat it more as a challenge than a limitation." Through the enhanced viewport, Bixie watched as one of the new vessels demonstrated this philosophy. It reached out with beams of crystalline energy, but instead of weapons fire, it began reconstructing damaged ships instantly. Matter itself seemed to flow according to their will. "As I said earlier," Park commented, noticing her amazement, "everything we developed has peaceful applications. These ships aren't just capable of unmaking matter, they can remake it just as easily. Rather useful for rescue and reconstruction efforts." "Incoming transmission from Earth Command," Tix announced. They're broadcasting to the entire galaxy." The message was brief but clear. Phase 1 complete. Operation Technological Liberation is now entering Phase 2. All ships proceed with infrastructure upgrades and medical aid distribution according to plan. "You've been planning this for a long time," Captain Nex observed quietly. "Generations," Park confirmed. "Ever since your people first tried to contain us. We knew eventually we'd have to choose between stagnation and direct action. So we prepared. Every limitation you placed on us became a puzzle to solve. Every technology you denied us became a field of research to master." "And now?" Bixie asked, watching as the new human vessels began systematic upgrades to everything in their range, from damaged ships to space stations to planetary infrastructure. "Now," Park smiled, "now we do what humanity does best. We innovate, we improve, and we move forward. Your civilization saw us as a danger to contain. We're about to show you why that was never possible." The tactical display lit up with new information as the human vessels began their work. They weren't just repairing damage or upgrading technology, they were implementing improvements that Bixie's enhanced sensors could barely comprehend. "By the way," Sears added casually, "that job offer includes immediate access to our full technological database. All those theories you developed but couldn't test due to technical limitations. We have the means to prove them all. Several of our engineers are particularly excited about your work on quantum wave harmonics." Bixie looked at her captain, who nodded slightly. Then she looked at the galaxy around them, being transformed before her eyes by technologies that bordered on magic. Finally, she looked at the job offer again. "Where do I sign?" "That's the spirit," Park laughed. "Welcome to humanity's vision of the future, First Officer Bixie. I think you'll find we have rather ambitious plans for galactic development." As if to emphasize his words, the 50 new human vessels began to move in concert, their crystalline hulls resonating with power that made their previous display look like a child's toy. The message was clear. This wasn't just a military victory, it was the dawn of a new era. Humanity hadn't just conquered the galaxy. They had arrived to revolutionize it, whether the galaxy was ready or not. And judging by the increasingly enthusiastic responses flooding in from across space, the galaxy was more than ready for what humanity had to offer. The age of limitation was over. The age of human innovation had begun. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.